The heat pressed against the tarmac, waves of it rising around the legs of polished flight suits and glinting off the sleek hulls of next-gen aircraft. At the edge of the ramp, where the shade ended and the sun ruled without mercy, stood a woman who didn't seem to belong. Her boots were worn, laces dusted white with age. Her olive shirt was faded, sleeves rolled to her elbows, tucked into a pair of utility pants sun-creased at the knees. Her name was Callie Reyes, though no one spoke it aloud. She stood beside an old C-130 Hercules, its matte gray fuselage streaked with grime and sand. The nose was dulled from sun, its belly scored from age. While other planes were prepped by teams in mirrored sunglasses and spotless vests, Callie's aircraft sat alone. No ground crew circled her cargo bay. No clipboard held her name. Only the faint sway of her flight gloves, looped through her belt, hinted at her readiness. Near the operations tent, a crowd had gathered pilots from France, Canada, Brazil, laughing, nodding, sipping bottled water as if waiting for their close-ups. Valerie Knox, the base's public affairs officer, stood in front of them in heels and aviators, a tablet in one hand and her voice on full broadcast. "Support crew, please stay behind the fuel line," she called, casting a glance toward the far end of the tarmac. "We don't want anyone wandering into the mission brief." A few turned, squinting. Someone laughed. No one called her name. Callie stayed still, her shadow long against the concrete, her face calm. The wind tugged gently at the hem of her shirt. Behind her, the massive aircraft loomed quiet and forgotten. She adjusted nothing, She said nothing. She watched the runway and waited. The sun had barely cleared the tree line when the morning coordination briefing began. A folding table had been set up beside Hangar 2, draped with a branded banner from one of the partner NGOs. Sleek jets sat behind it like showroom trophies, polished and primed for press footage. Dozens of personnel gathered under canvas shade, sipping iced coffee, murmuring over tablets. At the center stood Julian Harrow, sharp suit sleeves rolled up, aviators pushed onto his head, radiating the kind of control that expected applause. Callie approached with a manifest in hand, her boots trailing dust. She stopped just outside the circle, waiting for a break in conversation. No one acknowledged her. She cleared her throat gently and took one step forward, raising the sheet. "Julian, I've logged Juliet 4's availability. If the..." He didn't look at her. "Support crew, can you hold off? We're reviewing critical flight assets." His tone was clipped, loud enough for others to hear. Someone near the front smirked. Before she could reply, Valerie's voice rang from the mounted PA beside the table, her polished cadence dripping with amusement. Friendly reminder to logistics: do not approach briefing stations unless called. "You're not flying today." Laughter rippled through the group. Derek Solis, leaning on a wing strut nearby, turned to look. He wore a designer flight vest unzipped at the neck and grinned wide enough to show his perfect teeth. "She's with the Hercules." "Right." He gestured toward the distant aircraft. "Didn't know museums were donating exhibits now." The chuckle that followed wasn't loud, but it cut. A junior tech from his team lifted a phone and snapped a picture. Valerie's fingers tapped at her tablet. A moment later, her screen lit up with a captioned photo. "When the museum intern wants in on the mission." Callie didn't flinch. She nodded once, folded the manifest back in half, and stepped away. The group turned back to Julian, who was already calling up weather reports. Tessa Quinn watched the moment from the edge of the group, frowning. She moved to intercept Callie, her voice low. "That wasn't okay." Callie shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I wasn't invited." Tessa hesitated, then whispered, "They don't know what you can do." Callie offered a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "They don't want to know." Across the tarmac, Juliet 4 waited in silence. The long wing cast a shadow over the gravel berm behind the hangars, a dark triangle untouched by the light-hearted arrogance coating the field. Derek's jet was parked nearby, chrome reflecting the sky like a mirror. Its fuselage dwarfed the Hercules, casting its own shade across part of the old aircraft's tail. The contrast was stark performance versus presence, show versus substance. As the sun climbed higher, operations scattered. The crews headed to simulators or air-conditioned tents. Callie returned to Juliet 4 and ran a quiet systems check. Micah Brandt, a junior loadmaster, walked up without a word and handed her a new cargo strap. She accepted it with a nod. No one else approached. That afternoon, Valerie posted again. This time it was a selfie with Derek's crew. In the background, barely visible in the frame, was Callie under the wing of her plane, adjusting the lift flap. The caption read, "Real pilots, real missions, others just loiter." By early evening, the clouds had thickened. A ripple of alerts spread across the base. Tessa's phone buzzed first, then Julian's tablet. Then everyone's radios lit up at once. A second quake had struck just off the eastern trench, stronger than the first. The island's only functioning port was gone. The supply barge was adrift. The regional helipad had buckled, rendered useless. Julian paced in circles near the ops tent, barking into his headset. "No, we can't airlift from that angle. Too much debris. No, there's no landing clearance. I don't care what your donors say. We're not risking a crash on live stream." Derek threw a jacket over his shoulder and scanned the incoming flight chart. "My jet's out. Runway's too unstable. Nothing that size is touching down until they get a clean sweep team in." He looked annoyed, not worried. Valerie kept trying to update the press statement. "We'll say we're repositioning to prioritize long-term deployment. No need to mention delays." Near the end of the ramp, Callie leaned against the wheel strut of her C-130. She'd seen the same news roll across the portable terminal in her hand. No aircraft were going in. No airstrips left open. No ships docking. The island was cut off. Still, no one looked her way. She watched as Derek's team dismantled the preloaded crates beside his jet. She saw Tessa huddled over a satellite map, stress in every line of her body. She watched Julian stand in front of 3 cameras and give a statement that said nothing. Callie folded the terminal shut. Juliet 4 was ready, always had been. But readiness wasn't what they respected here. So, she sat on the edge of the loading ramp, elbows on her knees. Flight gloves still looped through her belt. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the tarmac. Her aircraft stayed quiet. Her name stayed unspoken. And still, no one called her. By the time dusk settled over the airfield, most of the base had retreated. The command tent glowed with the soft hum of screens and catered trays. Laughter floated out every few minutes, light and practiced. Callie remained at Juliet 4, her sleeves pushed to the elbow, palms smudged with grease as she slid her hand across the cargo floor, checking the last roller track. Her tools clinked beside her boot, a quiet rhythm against the distant whir of a generator. She worked without conversation, without noise. The aircraft, matte gray and blocky, had no name painted on its frame, only a stenciled number half faded by sun and time. Inside the cockpit, taped above the instruments, was a patch with fraying edges, a blue shield bordered in gold. Her mother's flight emblem from the hurricane response mission to San Juan, 1998. Callie had grown up near a forgotten National Guard airstrip, where weeds cracked the runway and rusted hangars smelled of fuel and stories. Her mother used to take her flying in a battered twin prop, pointing out storm walls from above and tracing coastlines in grease pencil on old charts. "It's not about the sky," she would say. "It's about getting what they need where they are. Don't fly for the view." She had taken that to heart. While her peers rushed toward airline programs or military academies, Callie worked her way through flight contracts in places no one filmed. Jungle supply drops in Colombia, iced-over strips in Alaska, a rotting tin hangar in Haiti where she bartered engine grease for fuel tabs. Her resume didn't sparkle. It survived. Juliet 4 had once been a parts shell, bought cheap at a federal auction. Callie rebuilt it over 3 years, piece by piece, with borrowed lifts and traded manuals. She replaced the hydraulics herself. She mapped every system by hand. She'd flown it across 4 continents on aid contracts no one tracked. Now, she wasn't even listed as a pilot in the NGO system. Just logistics support. It meant she could fix things, load things, move things, but never lead. Still, she logged every hour in her own book. She kept terrain charts by her cot, taping them to the inside of Juliet 4's wall. While the others dined with donors, she studied approach paths and wind models, marking notations in pencil with her initials, CR. She remembered Guatemala. The bridge had collapsed during the storm, cutting off a mountain hospital. They said no plane could make the turn, couldn't drop that low in those winds. She flew the load in herself, pulled the yoke at the last second, skimming treetops with meters to spare. The supplies landed. The hospital kept running. No one recorded it. No press. Just a chalked word oxygen on the crate. She didn't care. Tonight, the tarmac hummed with the sound of quiet failure behind closed doors. Callie unfolded a new topographic map, the corners soft from use. She ran a hand across the elevation lines, tapping the region nearest the island's ruined port. The relief base had no options left. They didn't know it yet, but they would. She reached for her logbook and made a new note, the pen whispering over the margin. No radio call, no mission number, just readiness, documented in silence. The night settled in around Juliet 4 like a secret. By morning, the relief base had fractured into silence and shouting. The quake had leveled the island's last helipad overnight, and the few coastal roads left intact had collapsed in landslides. Flights were grounded. Waterborne supply was impossible. The command tent buzzed with conflicting voices, half logistics, half panic. Derek Solis stood at the center of it all, his sunglasses pushed onto his head, frustration carved into his jaw. Fuel priorities aren't going to matter if nothing is moving. We've got pallets rotting in open air and no way to drop. Valerie Knox hovered nearby, directing a media team to stage a shot beside the base's logo. Her voice cut through the tension with hollow polish. Get a drone in the sky. We'll do a still of the crates, clean angles only. We'll caption it, ready for rapid response. She paused. Blur out the mess behind the fence. Inside Julian Harrow's office, glass walls kept the chaos visible, but not audible. He stood behind his desk, flipping through deployment logs, jaw tight, a cold brew sweating on the corner. The door opened quietly. Callie Reyes stepped in, flight gloves in one hand, her expression unreadable. He didn't look up. You here to report inventory? I'm here to request clearance, she said evenly. Juliet 4 is ready. I've mapped a route. I can hit the North Plateau with 30 meters margin. I just need airspace clearance. Julian glanced at her like she'd asked to fly a kite through a hurricane. You're not credentialed. We don't even have you listed for flight leadership. He gestured loosely toward the chaos outside. It's not the time to improvise. Reyes. Valerie stepped in from the hall, holding her phone. Is this a joke? We need professionals, not pilots of museum pieces. That plane doesn't even sync to our telemetry system. I don't need telemetry to fly a drop pattern, Callie said. Maybe not, Julian replied, half smiling. But we don't need another disaster on our hands. No, you stay on ground support. Callie nodded once. She turned without protest and stepped back into the hallway. Tessa Quinn caught up with her near the crate stacks. Her voice was hushed, urgent. You're really going. Callie didn't slow. They've had their chance. Tessa's hand closed around a folded paper. Use mine. Emergency override codes. I never turned them in after the last op. She pressed it into Callie's palm. If they ground you, they won't reach you before you're over the water. Callie tucked the paper into her flight jacket. You'll catch heat for this. I can handle it, Tessa said. Just don't miss. Micah was already at Juliet 4's side, stacking water crates on the loading ramp without being asked. He met Callie's gaze and offered a quick nod. No questions, just motion. Together they secured the final latches, cinched down the chute packs, checked wind resistance tags one final time. The sun was climbing fast, heat thick in the air. People noticed. A few stopped what they were doing and turned. Some filmed. Others watched from shaded tents, arms crossed. Derek stood beside his grounded jet, arms folded over his vest, brow furrowed. "She's gonna crack that thing in two," someone muttered. Another voice added, "This should be good for a laugh." Callie climbed the narrow stairs into Juliet 4 without looking back. Her boots echoed along the metal grating. Inside the cockpit, she moved like someone folding into a remembered rhythm. Systems check. Flaps. Pressure. She reached for the comms mic, flipping the switch to airfield broadcast. Her voice came through clear and low. Juliet 4 requesting departure clearance. "This won't wait." Silence followed. Not official, not approved, but heard. Engines spun up behind her, a deep, slow rumble that reached the far end of the tarmac. The propellers took their time finding balance, the sound building with each second until it swallowed the laughter and pushed against the walls of the hangars. Crates were secured. The ramp hissed closed. Lights blinked green across the panel. Tessa stood behind the fuel bay, watching. Valerie was frozen mid-pose near the press tent, eyes wide. Julian turned from his screen, too late to stop what had already begun. Micah backed away from the loading lift as the aircraft began to roll. Callie pushed the throttle, and Juliet 4 answered. The old plane surged forward with weight and purpose, lifting dust from the concrete, pushing its shadow ahead like a banner. The chatter fell away. The mocking turned to silence. From the far edge of the tarmac, Callie's aircraft rose into the heat shimmer, wheels tucking under like she'd done it 100 times before. She had, "In the command tent," someone whispered. "Is she actually going?" No one answered. No one had time. Juliet 4 was already a rising shape in the sky. Juliet 4 climbed slowly into the open sky, heavier than sleek jets but steady as stone. Her wings cut across the haze rising off the ocean, each prop turning with stubborn rhythm. Callie gripped the yoke, eyes on the distant line of clouds forming over the fractured islands. The radio lit up with Julian's voice, sharp and panicked. "Juliet 4, this is base command. Return to airfield immediately. You are not cleared for operation. Do you copy?" Callie didn't answer. She switched the channel to silent. On the ground, Julian paced in front of the comm station, headset slung crooked over his shoulder. Valerie stood behind him, phone in hand, lips curled in a smirk. Her latest post hit the feed, a blurred frame of Juliet 4 lifting off, captioned, "When the Relic rebels." For a few minutes, no one reacted. Most assumed it was a stunt, another misguided field op that would turn back before reaching altitude. But then, the live feed began. On the island, the last working uplink kicked in from the North Plateau. A technician rotated the satellite dish manually, fingers crossed as the screen cleared. The image that emerged was grainy, but unmistakable. A gray shape approached low over the hills. Children stood barefoot on the cracked foundation of what used to be a community hall. Elders gathered beside them, shielding their eyes. Nico Aaron held a radio in one hand, the other pressed flat against his chest. As the aircraft drew closer, details sharpened its tail number, the curve of its wing. Crates began to fall. Dozens of them, one by one, slipped from the belly of Juliet 4. Each was tagged in chalk. Large block letters: water, oxygen, antibiotics, food. The chutes opened in perfect sequence, blooming against the sky like soft white flowers. They drifted with eerie precision, guided by terrain Callie had memorized from paper maps. The supplies landed without chaos, no collisions, no scatter. They touched down in clearings near the camp, within reach of the families waiting below. The camera panned wildly, trying to keep up. A child pointed toward the plane and shouted. Others raised their arms, laughing, clapping, dancing around the first crate to land. In the relief base command tent, silence replaced sarcasm. One by one, monitors flickered with the uplink signal. The grainy footage held the room still. Even Julian stopped pacing. Derek leaned in close, his phone lowered. Valerie stepped back, fingers frozen over her touchscreen. Callie circled once above the island, slow and deliberate, ensuring every crate had dropped true. The camera on the ground followed the arc of her flight as if tracking a celestial body. Then the radio crackled. Juliet 4, Nico said, his voice thick with emotion. Impact averted. Every box landed. No injuries. No loss. Tell her. His voice broke. Tell her we saw her wings. Callie didn't speak. She didn't need to. The signal delay from the uplink meant that by the time the last chute had fallen, the footage was already spreading. Someone had clipped the live stream and posted it within minutes. Relic in the Sky read one title. No clearance. No mistakes read another. In one frame, her aircraft hovered against the afternoon light, crates suspended mid-drop, children with their arms raised below. It went everywhere. On base. Conversations stopped. A few ground crew gathered near the edge of the tarmac, watching the monitors without a word. Micah stood near the fuel tank, arms crossed, jaw tight with something like pride. Tessa leaned against the outer frame of Hangar 2, silent, tears brimming but held. Valerie's screen kept pinging with notifications. At some point, she turned it off. Derek didn't say anything. He just stared at the footage, then looked toward the sky, where Juliet 4 had become a fading dot on the horizon. The smirks were gone. Callie steadied the aircraft and turned her heading for home. The panel lights blinked green. Her hands were steady on the throttle. Wind curled around the frame, whispering past the glass. She reached up and removed her headset, setting it gently on the dash. For the first time since her arrival, no one doubted where she belonged, and not a single word had been needed to prove it. Juliet 4 returned under a low sun, trailing its shadow across the edge of the airfield. The engines groaned once as they throttled back, then eased into silence. Dust lifted around the tires as they kissed the concrete. The base, so loud, hours earlier, stood still. No one moved toward the aircraft. No one called instructions. The tarmac held its breath. Callie lowered the landing gear herself, checked the final pressure levels, then powered down one switch at a time. She opened the hatch and stepped out alone, boots thudding softly on the metal stairs. Her gloves were tucked into her belt again, streaked from hours of silent work. Across the ramp, rows of tents sat silent. Valerie Knox slipped out from between two of them, a tablet under her arm, her gaze flicking toward the ground. She walked briskly past the first cargo truck and disappeared behind the supply depot without a word. No one followed. Derek Solis stood in the shadow of his grounded jet, arms crossed, jaw tense. He watched Callie disembark, but said nothing. His usual grin was gone. He looked down at his boots, then away. High above the runway, Julian stood in the tower window, arms braced against the frame. His headset was slung around his neck, forgotten. The live feed still flickered in the background loops of parachutes. Rising dust, the unmistakable arc of Juliet 4 turning above the island. He didn't reach for the comm. He didn't try to stop her now. Tessa waited at the base of the tarmac. She didn't step forward, didn't smile. She just met Callie's eyes and said quietly, "They want you in Geneva." Callie gave a nod, small and impassive. No words, no surprise. She kept walking. Micah stood by the newly arrived crate pallet, arms behind his back, at ease. One foot rested against the tire block he'd moved earlier. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look he gave her was one of quiet recognition, solid, unshaken. A photographer from one of the media teams raised a lens as she passed. Before the shutter could snap, a handler placed a hand on the camera and shook his head. No one else tried. Callie walked through the line of silent gazes, her steps even, her back straight. The sound of her boots striking the runway echoed off the hangar walls. Near the fuel bay, a junior crew member, barely 20, uniform too new, raised his hand in a hesitant salute. He didn't call her name. He didn't expect a response, but Callie returned it with a single nod as she passed. The hangar was open when she reached it. Juliet 4's place at the far end had always been there, just outside the attention of the airbase's elite. Now the space felt wider, cleared of noise. She stepped inside, the darkness wrapping around her with familiar calm. That night, while the rest of the base filtered through briefings and damage reports, Tessa passed by the open hangar on her way to the staff bunkhouse. She paused in the doorway, the interior dim, the last light from the airfield casting gold against the hull of Juliet 4. Callie sat on a metal crate just beneath the wing. Her flight gloves lay beside her, one palm up, one down. She wiped them with a clean rag, moving slowly, methodically. Her expression was unreadable, not tired, not triumphant, just settled, the way someone looks when everything loud has finally fallen quiet. She didn't notice Tessa watching. Or if she did, she didn't turn. No press stood behind her. No applause waited. There were no speeches, no spotlight, no music playing from nearby tents, just the hush of a cooling engine and the soft rhythm of cloth over leather. Callie leaned back slightly, resting against the edge of the aircraft. She looked up at the ceiling for a long time, eyes tracking nothing. Juliet 4 loomed behind her, still streaked in dust, its skin marred by heat and age and now history. No part of it was beautiful, but it had flown, and it had delivered. Tessa turned away and walked into the night, letting the hangar close behind her with a gentle hum. Inside, the quiet continued. No roar, no sound but breath and fabric. The weight of what had been done hung in the air like something sacred. Callie picked up the gloves, folded them once, and placed them beside her on the crate. That was enough. The world watched the footage on repeat, crates falling in perfect arcs, parachutes catching sunlight as they opened one by one. No narration, no need. The image said everything. Juliet 4, weathered and wide-winged, banking above a broken island as children looked skyward, hands outstretched. One photo spread faster than the rest, a young boy holding a sealed water packet, his other hand raised in a wave, the aircraft shrinking into the clouds behind him. Networks ran headlines quietly, without spectacle. Precision drop, saves thousands. Unknown pilot identified as Callie Reyes. In the corner of a live broadcast, a chalked label scrawled in thick handwriting was visible: oxygen, urgent. Nico Aaron had taken the photo himself. It showed a half circle of survivors around the supply crates, their faces marked by exhaustion and relief. The message reached the base by noon. No caption, no plea, just the image. Valerie's posts vanished without announcement. The accounts remained, but every trace of mockery was gone. No statements followed. Julian's schedule disappeared from the base roster by evening. His name was replaced by someone else's, an unfamiliar signature on the next flight notice. Derek didn't speak in the briefing that followed. He kept his head down, eyes on the floor. Callie never addressed the attention. She didn't take interviews or respond to the broadcast requests. She stayed out of the meetings, the press tents, the sudden invitations. While others circled the event with theories and commentary, she returned to her corner of the hangar. Late that night, the airfield had gone quiet again. Juliet 4 rested beneath the overhead lights, streaked with fresh grime, her wing casting a long shadow across the floor. Callie stood beside her, one hand brushing against the fuselage. Her fingers moved gently across the metal as if checking for breath, a soft rhythm, a private ritual. From the open hangar door, a young girl from the logistics team approached. She paused in the entryway, saw Callie alone, and stepped back without saying a word. The moment was not hers to enter. Callie climbed the ladder slowly, pausing once to glance over the airstrip. Nothing moved. Inside the cockpit, the instruments waited in silence. She flipped a single switch, and the faint hum of power returned low, steady, familiar. the interior lit with muted green light, casting shadows along the edges of the flight panel. On the dash sat her logbook, edges curled from use. She opened it to the last marked page. The line written in small, steady print read, "No rank, no clearance, just flew." She took her pen and added a new entry beneath it. The ink moved across the page with purpose, then stopped. She capped the pen and set it down. Outside, the night deepened. The base faded to sleep. Juliet 4 remained quiet, still dusted in the color of effort and endurance. Callie sat in the pilot's chair without speaking. She didn't look at the cameras or the logs. Her hand rested on the throttle, unmoving. There was no smile, no sound, just her and the plane, ready. Sometimes, the ones we overlook are the ones already carrying the weight. Callie Reyes was never invited to lead, never praised or celebrated. But when it mattered most, she stepped forward without permission and delivered what no one else could. Her journey wasn't loud. It didn't seek credit. It was built on discipline, quiet preparation, and a strength that never asked to be seen. This story reminds us that true worth doesn't come from titles or attention. It comes from action, even when no one is watching. If you've ever been underestimated or told to wait your turn, let this be your reminder. You don't need permission to be extraordinary. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. And follow for more stories that honor quiet strength and the power of being ready when it counts.